Welcome, everyone, to the Huntington City Mission podcast that we call HopeCast. And thanks for joining us. I'm thinking today of the subject of how that we as believers, how that we should embrace the communities that we're in with the gospel of Christ. I was thinking of the passage in Jeremiah 29:7, where Jeremiah says, "And seek the peace of the city where I have caused you to be carried away captive, and pray to the Lord for it, for in its peace you will have peace." There certainly seems to be some blessing there for embracing the community that we're in. I also think about Acts 1:8, where Jesus, as he ascended into heaven, said, "But you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be witnesses to me in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth." Starts with where we are. However, as we look around, sometimes our communities they're not what they used to be. I mean, we just have to admit that. There's a lot of things that we wish were different. There's more poverty than we would like to see. There's more homelessness than any of us would like to see. And there certainly is a lot more issues with drugs and other just substance use problems. What I've noticed, it seems like in some of my brothers and sister churches, is that it seems like that some of us have just thrown up our hands and said, well, we're just going to wait until it comes back to be like the good old days. And folks, the good old days are gone. But however, like Esther, we were born and placed here for a time such as this. And my time being at Huntington City Mission, one of the people that I have met that I'm really thankful for is Pastor Keith Wiebe. And Pastor Keith is the pastor at Grace Gospel Church. They have a history with the Huntington City Mission. And they're one of their founders, and those of you who have been local for a long time will remember the name of Mel Efall, was apparently very essential in helping the Huntington City Mission to get started. But they have a history of working with us beside that. So, number one, welcome, Keith.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for spending the time this morning to come and sit down and talk with me. And why don't you talk about, Keith, some of the unique relationship that Grace Gospel Church has had with the Huntington City Mission?
Well, Mitch, first of all, it's great to be here with you, and I love what's been happening with the mission, and I'm excited for the future with the transition of leadership like you talked about in the last podcast. Grace Gospel Church, we have been around for a little over 88 years now, and our founding pastor, like you said, was Mel Efall. He came to Huntington as a young evangelist with... He was invited here by the Cross Tabernacle. It was a big church on the east end of town. It was located about where old timers would say where the Big Bear Plaza was. It's the HIMG building now. And that church is long gone, but he was brought here, and a small group of people in that church asked him if he would be willing to stay and help them start a mission down on the west end of Huntington. I guess it was a little rough in those days as well. And so they got a storefront down about where the gazebo is now, and they started the West 14th Street Mission, and before long that grew into what became Grace Gospel Church. But Mel Efall had a heart for challenging areas and challenging communities, and that's why he stayed, and he took that step of faith. My understanding of the history is that he was instrumental in helping to start the Huntington City Mission.
Yep, that's right.
And Grace has had a long relationship. I've really appreciated being able to learn from the other folks here at the mission as we've been working on how we can adjust and put ourselves in the best possible place to help reach our community in the west end of Huntington.
That's great. That's good stuff. And Grace has been involved in some creative things. I remember one of the things is that as we were in COVID, and we couldn't get Lysol, we couldn't get anything like that. And Grace did a Lysol Sunday for us, which was great, and it really helped us to get through that time. But one of the first things that I noticed when I attended and had the privilege to speak at Grace Gospel Church was I saw the numbers 7650 on the walls, and I found out you could ask just about any one of their members, and they could tell you exactly what that was about. So, Keith, why don't you tell us about that?
Well, that's really been a gift that God gave to us. I think probably every church wants to reach out to communities and knows that we should, but it's hard to figure out how to do it. And I'd love to say that we had some great master plan, but we didn't. We don't. Mm-hmm. God just sort of dropped this in our lap. Mm-hmm. We were looking at a piece of property adjacent to our church, and we're hoping to purchase it. Didn't have the money, ended up being given to us, but that's a whole nother story. But in the process of that, I learned that according to the last census, there were 7,650 people living within a 1 mile radius of our church. Yeah. And I'll tell you, that was a personal moment for me. It just captured my heart, because I thought there are 7,650 people who could walk to Grace Gospel Church on Sunday morning. It would be a total chaotic catastrophe if they did, but we would love it. But everybody in our church, like you said, knows that number now. When we ended up being given that building, as we were figuring out what to do with it, we had a dedication Sunday for it. We were thinking of some kind of community outreach facility. A couple of us went through and put up signs, pieces of paper that said things like, imagine the possibilities, go out into the highways and hedges, 7650. And it began to transform our church. We call it Project 7650, and we thought, okay, we've been around this neighborhood for a long, long time. But in the early days, most of the people in our church were from that neighborhood. But as time goes by, people are spread out, east end of town, Ashland, Chesapeake, South Point, all over the place. And the neighborhood had become more difficult. And our church is a fairly traditional church. We don't apologize for that. But there was a disconnect there for us. And missions was important. We supported missionaries around the world, but disconnect between our church and our own community. And so we thought, okay, what can we do? And we started out just thinking, okay, we're going to try to reach our Jerusalem here. We had maps with our church in the middle of a red circle drawn 1 mile out. Yeah. And we figured out that we could take a couple Saturdays, get a bunch of people together, and we would go out to every single house in that 7650 community and invite them to whatever our next thing was. And then we started to think, well, what's the next thing that we should invite them to? What would folks want to come to? And we started showing Disney movies on the wall of the church outside in the summertime, and passing out hot dogs and things like that. And we've really just been figuring it out as we go.
Yeah, that's great. So that's a pretty big step for a church. I would think that it would be a pretty big paradigm shift for especially some of the people who have been there for a good while. Was it hard to get people to, I don't like this phrase, but I don't know what else to say, to buy into this idea?
I would say that people weren't resistant to it. We just didn't know what to do. Yeah. It was just it was a different economy to us. So we were trying to figure this out. And I remember in a deacons meeting, one of our deacons was talking about this, and he said, I was out last Saturday on one of our 7650s, he called it, where we were going to all of the houses. And he said, I knocked on a door, and the guy came to the door, and he said, I'd come to your church, but you guys are pretty fancy, and these sweats are the best thing I have to wear. Yeah. And it was like a light bulb came on over the guy's head. And the guy started talking, and the conversation was, hey, we got to get the church out of the building. What are we going to do? Yeah. And we realized that while we're not going to compromise truth, that doesn't serve anybody, but some of the things that we had become comfortable with were actually barriers to the gospel. That's right. And, a pastor can get up and talk about this stuff, but when we actually experience it and we see people that we want to reach, we realize we've got to do something about this. So we started talking about it, and a couple of things happened. As they were talking about getting the church out of the building and what's this going to look like, and one of them said, well, what about the old time tent revivals? Because people were going back to what they knew, and I thought, well, that's maybe an idea, I don't know. And then one of the guys said, well, my brother-in-law has a 40 by 60 foot tent in his barn. And I thought, you got to be kidding. And as the conversation went on, they said, let's do something on a Sunday. And two things happened. That conversation and one more thing birthed what we call I Love Huntington Sunday. And the other thing that happened was the release of the heroin movie back in 2017, documentary about Huntington. We had, I think it was in 2016, 2017, there was a horrible day in Huntington where a bad batch of heroin hit the streets.
Yes, right.
And I think it was 26 people died in 4 hours. And that hit national, international news. Yeah. And then after the heroin movie came out, and the heroin movie was highlighting and celebrating the people who were really working hard to make a difference and did a great job with that. But it also highlighted some of the challenges in Huntington. And we thought, man, there's just a lot of bad news, a lot of bad press about Huntington, just with overdoses and the drug capital of the world, they were calling it. And so we thought we want to celebrate the good things that are happening here. So we call it I Love Huntington Sunday. It was kind of a cross between a Sunday morning and a carnival. We had the tent set up outside. We started with a brief service. We had inflatables and little ponies and antique cars and hot dogs for everybody.
Great.
And we had about 950 people come that first year, and that was great. But this is the thing that I remember about that first I Love Huntington Sunday. I think it was in 2017. Our church, that was our buy-in moment. Everybody in our church was involved, old, young.
Oh, that's good.
If they're familiar with the neighborhood, if they're not, they figured out something they could do, and they were all involved. And after that first one, somebody said, "You want to do it again?" I said, "Absolutely." And the next year we did it again, and we had around 11 or 1,200 people come. But the difference was the second year we had about 3 times as many people come for the service portion.
Oh, nice.
And we had 36 people trust Christ.
Oh, that's terrific.
And so that's been a really, really special thing for us. But that's where we saw that the church bought into this.
Yes,
so we don't quite know what we're going to do, but we're going to do something.
That's right. And the old saying, nothing succeeds like success. So I'm certain that once they saw some of those results, that would be easier for them to buy in. So what would you tell me how it has changed or affected the church since you've been doing that?
When in the early days, I thought, boy, this is going to be great. We are going to fill this church building up with folks from this community, and that is my prayer. And we have had people from the community come, and there are folks in our church from the community, and we see lives being changed. But I have seen a congregation change. The sensitivity, the heart, and it's not that it wasn't there before. People wanted to serve, they wanted to reach. We just didn't have the means, and God dumped this into our laps. I'll give you an example. I would talk about this all the time, and folks are coming from the neighborhood, and we want to make sure that we're being welcoming and gracious and removing barriers. And a lady came up to me after church, and she said, what we could do to help these people. And to be honest with you, when I hear a phrase like "these people," that bothers me. But I knew what she meant. She said, well, we have church clothes, and what if we had a closet where we put our extra church clothes, and so when they come, they could get church clothes to wear. I said, well, that's a nice idea, but doesn't that still communicate that to be part of this club, you have to look like this?
Right.
And you could see it. Yeah, you could see it on our face. You went, oh, we don't want to do that. I said, yeah, no, I don't think so either. So it's been messy, and we're figuring it out as we go.
Yeah, that's so good. I've developed a thing I always say with our Chad Hatfield, our chaplain here at the mission, that I don't think ministry is really ministry unless there's some dirt up under your fingernails.
We've got a lot of that.
And but I love that. And what I have learned is that we really overthink this. It's if you treat people with dignity, if you treat them as people who were born or created in the image of God, and you learn their name, you're willing to shake their hand, look them in the eye, call them by name, ask them how they're doing. Man, that's probably half of the battle right there.
Yeah. Just show some respect.
That's right. Because our folks, when I say our folks, I'm thinking of the mission, and even though I'm officially semi-retired now, it's still our folks.
Right.
And our folks don't get that a lot. And you can imagine. Sometimes I walk out to talk to them, and they think I'm going to ask them to leave, and I'm sure they get that a lot. And by the way, I understand that from businesses. I understand why we have to do that, but to just say no, I just want to see how you're doing. It's amazing at the response that we get.
Mm-hmm.
So. Let's see what we're going to do next year. Have you had any pushback from the community or anyone from within the church? I know that the more that we as the mission have tried to reach out into that segment of the community, we've actually received some pushback and some complaints for it.
We really haven't.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah.
Certainly within the church, there's been just a great deal of support. I don't say this to brag, although I'll brag on our church a little bit. It's not uncommon to have more volunteers for an event than we can handle, which you don't hear in church life very often.
Right.
As far as the community goes, people have seemed to appreciate it, even from the city and city officials. I'll say Mayor Steve Williams, he and I probably wouldn't have seen eye to eye on a number of things,
sure.
But he was very supportive of what we were
same
doing
here,
in the West End.
Guy.
Yeah, I do too. I really came to appreciate him, and in fact, we were talking once about a project and asking him for some help, and he said to me, Pastor Keith, I just figure whenever I see something good happening on the West End, you guys are doing it. Now that was nice and
really good.
And probably too generous and probably a little political, but I appreciated the sentiment, and I do have to say that he did come through and help support us. But really, beyond that, the city council and other officials, the Huntington Police Department, they've been helpful to us.
Yeah, very good.
One other thing I mentioned, this might go back in earlier, but with I Love Huntington Sunday, one of the things we did is we wanted to celebrate others who were doing good things to help Huntington.
Yes.
They didn't have to be like us exactly, and so we called them community partners.
Yes.
And we had recovery places, Lily's Place, first responders.
I believe we received one of those.
City
as well.
Mission.
Right.
Yeah, we called them community partners. We had certificates printed. And the certificate's not a big thing, but we just wanted the folks to come up in front of everybody who was there in the community. Not our church, yes, but everybody in the community, so you could say, these are folks who are here to help you, and we appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, that's excellent. We personally here have had good experiences with those partners as well, and work very closely with them. The police chief, Phil Watkins, and even the fire chief, Greg Fuller, just good brothers in the Lord and good guys to work with. So what's coming up for Grace Gospel Church? What do you see as you move forward?
Well, there've been a couple of chapters in hindsight as I look back, and each time I see God sort of dumping something into our lap. And it's something that we realize as a church, if this had happened 5 years ago, we weren't ready.
Yes,
as
right.
people, we didn't know. But then he, in shady green pastures, God leads us along, as the old hymn says. And
that's right.
So we had the 7650, and we showed the Disney movies, and I Love Huntington Sunday, and you put a carnival out there and food, you're going to draw a crowd. We thought that's good, but we want to do more than that. We want to be connecting with people, and really, ultimately, we want to be connecting people to Jesus. And so we have really gotten philosophical about this thing, and we've put some boundaries on what we do, because there are a lot of needs in Huntington. We're not equipped to meet them all.
Right.
But we are doing what we do for the purpose of introducing people to Jesus.
Yeah.
But we realized that when Jesus came, he didn't just sit up and preach all the time.
Yeah.
He met people's immediate needs.
That's right.
He fed them and he healed them.
Yeah.
And he used that as a bridge that he could go across with the gospel to meet their eternal need. And
right.
so that's what we're trying to do too. And we started out thinking, okay, how can we do a better job of introducing people to Jesus? And like a lot of churches, we'll have a Christmas Eve service. And we thought we'd like this to be an outreach thing. But as we looked around on Christmas Eve, it was mostly our people and their family members who came in. And so one year we got the idea, well, let's feed everybody Christmas dinner. But let's not just do the chicken on paper plates here in the gym. We want to give them a Christmas dinner that they can take home and have. So our goal was to feed 500 families. So we thought, well, that might be 2,000, 2,500 people. And our folks in our church were collecting all the fixings, I call them. We had these boxes. We called it a community Christmas celebration. And we put out a list of the canned goods and things like that for a Christmas meal. A wealthy man who lives in Texas heard about this. And he called and he said, I'm sending you $8,000. I want to buy all the hams for this. And I think we had some extras and we brought those to the mission that year. Sure. And so then the community caught wind of this, and it just took off. News stations were calling, and I was thinking, man, we've got all this food, we've got all this publicity, we're doing a couple Christmas Eve services on this evening, I hope people come. Well, the city buses rerouted and started dropping people off in the parking lot at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they were saying, well, just give me the food and I won't worry about it. And I'm like, nope, you have to come to the service tonight. And I was sitting in my office before the first service was going to start, and I was thinking, Lord, I just hope people come to this. And I walked into the auditorium, and it was packed. Wow. And I hardly recognized anybody. And I was so excited about that. And just one story that was repeated a number of times, but there was a lady I was talking to afterwards. And she told me that she had heard about this on the radio that afternoon. She has family in the area, but there was a rift there. They had abandoned her. She had no Christmas, and she had nobody. She came that night, and as we talked, she accepted Christ as her Savior.
That's
and I just loved that. But the story continues. We tried to follow up with everybody who made a decision that night. And this lady in particular, because I talked to her, I was trying to find her, and I couldn't find her. As the weeks went by, and just didn't know where she was. Next year, we did it again. And I walked into the gym, and a lady came walking up to me, and she said, "Do you recognize me?" And I always hate when somebody says that because my memory's not very good. And I said, "I'm not sure." And she goes, "Well, I've lost a lot of weight since the last time you saw me." And I thought, why would you say that? I don't know how to respond to that. But she said, "I was that lady." And she said, "I got saved." And she said, "I moved to the east end of town." That's why we hadn't been able to find her. She said, "I've been involved with the church. I heard you guys were doing this. I came back down and I wanted to help." She was there helping with that. And so we've done those kinds of things, the Christmas outreaches and things like that. But the latest chapter has been really exciting. We began to hit another challenge. And one of the biggest things I think that God has been teaching me just as a person, as a Christian over the years, and it's so rudimentary, it's Christianity 101. I should have learned a long time ago, but I can be a worrier, and every time there's a problem, God has shown me that He has already been working on the supply even before I knew there was a problem.
That's right.
And I wish I could say I've learned it and so I don't worry anymore, but I'm working on it. But we started to hit a challenge. We've got a lot of things going on at the Grace Gospel Ministry, and we have a wonderful school, Grace Christian School. And sometimes you have ministries and they're all good, but they can distract from each other.
Right.
And you and I have talked about this. We want to provide space for recovery groups and things like that, but sometimes a ministry like that and your first grade class, none of them are gonna they're gonna bump. And so we thought, what can we do? How can we do this? Well, a couple of years ago, a mutual friend of ours, Barry Smith, called out of the blue, and he said, my wife and I are in Tennessee. We used to be in Huntington. We're older now. We have a building. Do you want it? And I said, yes, we do. And Barry actually used to be on our Grace Christian School staff years ago and had a ministry to folks that were in challenging circumstances on the street. And it's a little church. It's 2 blocks away from our campus. And it's perfect. One of our other pastors, David Brocky, and I have been talking for a while about we need some kind of a headquarters out in the middle of the neighborhood. And we're right there, but out in the middle of the neighborhood. And this was it. God had it. And we thought about trying to buy a house, but He gave it to us. It's perfect. We've named it The Refuge.
Oh, I love
based
that.
on Psalm 46. God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in time of trouble. And our goal is to get personal and build relationships and build that bridge. And again, we introduced it to the church. People were excited about it. We didn't completely know what we were going to do with it. And what has been happening there has just been amazing. The first thing we did, before we actually technically owned the building, it was right before school started, we had a back-to-school event. And folks in our church donated backpacks full of school supplies. We had some ladies in our church that were giving haircuts, and we had some school clothes and things like that. And I pulled up to the building about 15 minutes before the event was supposed to start, and there was a line of people down the block.
Yeah.
And I got so teary, I almost couldn't see, because they came, and I thought, I don't even know how they knew, but they knew, and they came.
Yeah.
We've moved our Christmas Eve outreach there.
Oh, that's good.
We have recovery groups. We've partnered with the health department.
Nice.
To provide medical help for ladies on the streets in difficult situations, and we have counselors there for them. And the health department has told us that, whereas in the past, efforts there it was very difficult to make those connections, but ladies know that this is a safe place that they can come. And then some creative things. Some of our young moms did I think they called it Glam It Up or something like that, and they and their daughters got there and they did makeovers for girls in the community. And we've done just various kinds of winter essentials giveaways with clothing. One of our teachers, she's an art teacher, Katie Thompson, and she came to me about a year ago and she said, what about doing an art camp there for a week in the summer?
I like that.
And you're more of a visionary. I mean, I love Katie and she can do it, but I thought, I don't know if that's going to work, but it did.
Yeah.
And people came, and all of these things are bridges to go across with the gospel of Jesus Christ.
That is so good. And my family had that same mentor, was a mentor for me, Barry Smith, and we had some activity with them getting that started originally. And so it's so good to hear that, because I think that's really the vision for the building to begin with. I've got one more question to ask you, and if you've got anything else, we can talk about that too. But what I'm wondering is, if you had a pastor, from an area of town that maybe doesn't have the best reputation, that would come to you and say, Keith, I love what you guys have done here. What encouragement would you give me to start something similar in my area?
Well, let's say do it, first of all. And, I think one of the things that God has done for us is He has helped us see where we are as a blessing and not an obstacle.
Yeah.
And this is not to cast aspersions on churches across the board, but churches sometimes think, well, we want to have a pretty campus, and we want to move to the suburbs and leave an inner city work, but we're going to move. And it's not always wrong, where your people are, but when we started this I Love Huntington Sunday, and we were practicing putting up that tent that I mentioned, and we were trying to figure that thing out. Another pastor came up, and we were all out in the parking lot working on this thing, and he said, what are you guys doing? And I said, well, we're going to do this I Love Huntington Sunday. We're trying to learn how to put up a big tent. And I told him what we were going to do, and he said, man, you guys are so lucky. We have to go someplace to our mission field, but you've got it right across the parking lot. And a number of years ago, we did a renovation on our auditorium, and we had some consultants come in to help us figure out what to do and just kind of look the ministry over with fresh eyes. And one of the guys said to me, he looked at our building, and our building's old. It's a little bit, it's beautiful to me, but it's a little haphazard. If you walk through, you can get lost. And he said, would you consider moving? And I said, not in a million years. I said, and I'm not saying that for me. Our church would not move from this spot. We were founded on this spot, and we feel that God has called us here. So that might be too long of an answer, but to your question, I would say to that pastor, appreciate where you are and look for the needs that are there. God's provided those as a blessing.
Right.
Figure out what's a small way that you can start just meeting those needs to build relationships, to use those as a bridge to go across with the gospel. There's a guy in our church, Mitch, who is just instrumental in helping us with this refuge ministry. And his testimony is he and his wife were on the streets for a while. They almost lost their kids and came out of addiction. And when we were just starting to get into this, he said to me, Keith, he said, you got to realize it's one of the more frustrating ministries because the hold of addiction is so strong. And he said this, he said, you might go after 100 and get one. You have to be ready for that. And I think it's easy to give up.
It is.
It's a very transient neighborhood.
Right.
And so...
Tried that, didn't work.
Right, yeah. And we have tried a lot of stuff that didn't work.
Yeah.
And then there's some things that just take off, and we're like, didn't see that coming. And God does that.
Yeah. Well, that's good stuff, buddy. Well, again, we have Pastor Keith Wiebe from Grace Gospel Church. He and his wife Kim and their children have become special to my wife Bonita and I, and I'm just so thankful for Keith for you coming today and taking part in this with us. And God bless you, buddy. And as our old friend Bob Barber used to say, may your tribe increase.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mitch, thanks so much for the time, and thank you for what you're doing here. I love the partnership, and I'll say this too, in answer to your last question, as far as what a pastor should do, you've helped us as a church to figure out what to do. You've helped us avoid some pitfalls, and trying to figure out ministry in tough communities. There are other people doing it, and sometimes we have to realize we're going to need to work with people that aren't exactly like us.
That's right.
But if we're agreed on the gospel, and we don't compromise on that.
That's right.
We work together.
That's it.
To see people in heaven.
That's great. Thank you, brother.
Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you for listening today. Hope it's been a blessing to you. And God bless you till we meet again.